Welcome back to video lecture number 7 of Jewelry Design and Sketching. Today we'll be looking at drawing facet lines. We'll be looking at tablets and faceted stones because cabochons by definition aren't faceted and have no other outlines than their girdles. As you make your first attempts at drawing facet lines, you'll need a stone outline drawn on a guide to get started. Feel free to use the drawings from the previous lecture. Otherwise, there's no harm in drawing new stones to practice and consolidate your skills. Let's look at tablets first. As you may remember from the previous video lecture, tablets have a flat top and a flat bottom, but usually come with a neatly beveled edge both sides, which is uniform in width. It substantially reduces the risk of chipping and is conducive in every way to setting. It also contributes to the looks and the structural soundness of a tablet in its setting. So far, so good when it comes to tablets. Before we roll up our sleeves and get into drawing facet lines on faceted stones, we should distinguish between what is essentially two kinds of faceting. One kind is called step cuts. Step cuts have trapeze-shaped facets. Because of this, the facet edges, the lines we're going to draw, run parallel to the girdle, creating what looks from the top like a flight of stairs, hence the name step cut. Faceted stones that qualify as step cuts are rectangular, square, or tapered baguettes, and square or rectangular emerald cuts. The other category of faceting is the brilliant cut. Contrary to the trapezoidal facet shape of step cuts, brilliant cut stones have facets that are either triangular or kite-shaped. Either kind of faceting has its own distinct way of funneling light through the stone. That means that either imparts a different character on the stone. But let's look at the parts of both step cuts and brilliant cuts. Let's start at the top of the stone. The largest facet is called the table. It is absolutely planar and reaches about 60% of the width in most faceted stones. Gemologists like to express stone dimension in terms of percent, whereby the width of the stone is the reference dimension, or 100%. In other words, you could say that the table reaches about 3/5 across the stone's width. You could argue that tablets are stones with oversized tables, one on the top and one on the bottom, both parallel to each other. Now the part above the girdle of a faceted stone is called the crown. The facets that make up the crown, with the exception of the table, are collectively referred to as the crown facets. The part below the girdle of a faceted stone is called the pavilion. The facets that make up the pavilion are collectively referred to as the pavilion facets. Now the pavilion facets converge to a point called the culate. All cuts, with the exception of rectangular baguettes and rectangular emerald cuts, have a culate. With rectangular baguettes and rectangular emerald cuts, the culate is extruded and forms a line or junction called the keel. Think of the keel of a ship. Now it stands to good reason that one of the least desirable characteristics in faceted stones are variations in symmetry. Symmetry is an essential premise of faceting because much of the appeal of a faceted stone relies upon the pattern of this faceting itself, regardless of the shape of the outline or the kind of cut. If, for example, the table is not centered because the crown facets aren't a uniform width all around, the magic of the whole gem quickly evaporates into thin air and poof, the appeal and potential confidence in your goods goes south with it. Luckily, you're already ahead on that aspect because you've set up your stone on a guide. You'll see how guides come in to save the day yet again when you move on to drawing a stone with facet lines. Now you'll only use this method for larger stones, typically the center stone in the design. As stones get smaller, it won't be worth your while to go into the details of facet lines, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward. Armed with that trade vocabulary and those considerations, we can move on to drawing facet lines. As discussed in the previous segment, the beveled edges applied to tablets should be uniform all around. You could argue that they're underdimensioned crown facets, and if they're not uniform in width, the whole stone kind of unravels, visually speaking. So when you've got a rectangular tablet like a baguette shape, simply decide on a bevel width and carry the width you drew on the first bevel to the other sides. If you need a little help with the uniformity, take the offset from the first bevel to a transfer paper and carry that to the remaining sides. Once you've got all the bevels together, don't forget to do the corners. The short little lines called junctions are quick and easy to put in, but do make sure they point to a corresponding point on the guide. That will nicely support the symmetry of your stone. And what about more complex shapes like, say, a heart shape? Well, extend on what we just did with the baguette. Start somewhere convenient and maintain the same offset all around the stone. The trick with drawing offset curves is the same as with drawing offset lines. Keep the curve you are offsetting within your field of vision at all times. You are in effect drawing a parallel, only that this time it's curved instead of straight. So it's really just an application of what you already know from drawing parallels. Should you find it challenging to maintain a uniform bevel width, go ahead and put your transfer paper to good use. There's nothing wrong with putting it to work for the sake of providing the necessary references. Once you've got a few of the same dimension down, it's time to connect the dots again in a way that your curve is nice and parallel to the tablet's outline. And let's not forget about drawing the crease where the bevels meet in the cleft or the point junction. And that pretty much sums it up for tablets. Let me complete the segment with these renderings of tablets with all the shapes discussed in the previous video lecture.